may not be doing. I must take exception to a few of the statements in the foreword to KUB's response, which states, first, quote, "No vegetation management program can be designed that completely eliminates impacts on individual customers," end quote. Yes, that is true. However, this program will still have very negative, unfair, and in some cases unlawful impacts on tens of thousands of customers and for the entire community. The response also says, quote, "It is the one program that requires individual customers to give up something for the greater good of the community. No one must abandon their legitimate legal property rights to support KUB's interpretation of what is, quote, the greater good for the community," end quote. KUB can achieve its goals of safe, reliable, and efficient service without the costly, excessive, and totally unnecessary removal of vegetation which KUB admits is not currently threatening power lines. The KUB response says, quote, "Our hope is that the changes we are making now and in the future will help customers to understand, appreciate, and accept that the approach we are taking is reasonable and is sensitive to their individual needs and concerns," end quote. I regret that KUB's recommendations and, quote, approach do not go far enough. I did not expect to change any minds here today. However, I want to be sure that there is no doubt as to my position regarding this board's action. I note that no board members bothered to contact me to discuss these issues. I note that very few board members attended any of the recent public input sessions. I note that most board members only attended 1 or 2 meetings of the tree trim policy review panel, so they did not hear the discussions or the rationales for our recommendations. If the KUB board refuses to make these additional changes in policy, it will have missed a great opportunity to resolve these issues. It will have disregarded the concerns of many citizens and the public officials who are already on record regarding their position on these issues. We will be observing to see how the panel's recommendations are implemented and considering all other options for continuing our work to get these policies changed. Thank you. And I do have a copy of my statement for the board.
Are there other input? Questions, comments?
I made the motion to adopt Resolution 1234, and in light of that, let me speak to some of these comments. I'm not inclined to ask that my motion to adopt Resolution 1234 be amended in any way. But I want to address some of these comments that have been made. In terms of board members not attending the meetings of the tree panel, that's something that we've talked about before. We wanted the tree panel to be able to do its work in such a way that the process wasn't chilled, because in the past, this board has been accused of being an intimidating group of people. We didn't want to intimidate the process. And Larry, no offense, but in terms of nobody contacting you, you and I have met personally a couple of times over years past, and in all honesty, I think it's a little bit presumptuous for one single board member to insist that they should be contacted instead of other members of the panel. This whole notion of small diameter trees was never a part of the panel's recommendations, and as such, I don't think it's worthy of any further discussion. The stumps and the removal of trees, that's an interesting issue that I think, based upon Liz's comments and other comments that have been made even here today, that will probably be a little bit of an ebb and flow as the process goes along. You know, what's interesting about this removal of the limbs, I've seen billboards all over Knox County recently that tells people to not move their wood because there are some concerns about pest infestation that's in wood that's been cut down, and if you move it from one location to another, the things that have infested that wood may move to some other part of the community. That's just an example of the yin and yang that I think is in place here. You know, just between the stumps and the tree removal alone, that's $780,000 in potential cost to the system. And you know, here again, that's just something that we need to take a look at as we go along. And this is not intended to be critical of some other process that's going on in the community right now, but I thought it was interesting that this committee or this panel that's looking at the development of the ridge lines throughout the community, they're stuck in $17,000 in postage expense. Yeah, the $780,000 figure here is substantially more than that, and we just have to be mindful of the cost and the impact. I've been on this board for 13 years. I trust that the staff and the board will continue to take a look at these issues and will adjust as we go. And for those reasons, I'm not inclined to amend my motion to approve Resolution 1234.
Any other comments or input?
I call for the question.
Mr. Coley, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Anderson.
Aye.
Commissioner Cannell. Commissioner Jones.
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson.
Aye.
Commissioner Simmons. Commissioner Thompson. And Commissioner Williams is not here, so Resolution 1234 is passed.
And I'd like to just add a closing comment, somewhat to Mr. Jones's comments. Obviously, we've said it enough. We appreciate the panel's work. I think you need to look at this as a work in progress. I pledge to you that this board will direct this staff to continue to improve this process. For example, the city picks up debris. Can we not work with the city to see if maybe they can pick up the wood that gets cut within the city? I would be happy to try to contact somebody to see if that's possible. They probably have a budget for that already. I'm not sure that we've inquired about that. But the point is, yes, we're passing a resolution. I understand that some of you are disappointed that we left some things out, but I pledge to you that this will continue to be a working process, and the whole vegetation management process will continue to be reviewed and improved. And again, thank you, and we appreciate the fact that you were here again to give us your comments. So, but for now, the motion is passed, so we're moving on to resolution number 1235. Providing for an increase in wastewater rates to be reflected on customer bills beginning April 2011.
Commissioner, I'll recognize Mark Walker to summarize this resolution. I want to remind you that this has been brought to you many times up to today. Most recently in April with our 5-year plan presentation, and then last month Mark did a thorough presentation on this subject, and then also a white paper summarizing the components of this rate increase were provided to you individually. So this is a rate making and rate increases is a very significant issue, something that we take very seriously. But in order for us to comply with the terms of the consent decree, it is necessary for us to have the revenue that it becomes available through the rate increases. So I'll recognize Mark for this presentation.
Excuse me, Commissioners. As we have discussed in the past, a wastewater rate increase is needed this fiscal year to fund the federally mandated capital requirements of the consent decree. And if approved by the board on 2 readings, the proposed rate increase will generate an additional $7.2 million in annual revenue for the wastewater division for the purpose of funding wastewater system improvements. If approved, the proposed rate increase will raise the average residential wastewater customer's monthly bill $4.44 from its current level of $37.86 to $42.30. And if adopted on 2 readings, the increase will be reflected on customer bills beginning in April of 2011. Now, I do want to point out to you that the proposed rate increase, the level of it, is lower than it otherwise would have been due to the wastewater division's share of approximately $40 million in O&M savings that will be achieved over the next 5 years. And that was part of our recession response plan and several cost-saving measures that we've implemented over the past couple of years that will save $40 million across the entire company. The wastewater division's share of that enables us to lower this rate increase slightly, and it's also enabled us to push it back approximately 6 months. The original planned effective date was October of 2010 last month. We're now looking at April of 2011. And finally, the proposed rate action also includes some very modest modifications to the wastewater rate structure, which are consistent with changes we made to the water rate structure back in 2009, and it's also consistent with what we're seeing in the rate structures of other local wastewater providers and those across the nation as well. Commissioners, this chart reflects the impact of the proposed rate increase on customer bills. Now, while the impact on an individual customer's monthly bill will vary depending upon that customer's actual usage for a given month, our historical data indicates that approximately 2/3 of our residential city wastewater customers will see an increase of $4.44 or less on their monthly bill. And actually 25% would see an increase of approximately $2.50 or less on their monthly bill. And as we have noted, the purpose of the rate increase is to fund the capital requirements of the consent decree. And as the board well knows, those capital requirements are significant. In fact, we estimate that we'll spend approximately $650 million in capital alone over the life of the consent decree. $530 million for collection system improvements, that's the Phase 10 program that you well know. $120 million for treatment plant and storage projects, that's under the composite correction plan, which was the amendment we executed to the CD back in 2009. Now, in addition to that, over that same time period, we will spend about $280 million for additional wastewater capital projects. The majority of that will be for our systematic replacement and rehabilitation program that will begin in 2017 once the original term of the CD ends. So in total, if you add all the dollars together, the wastewater division is going to invest close to $1 billion over the entire term of the CD, and over 70% of that will be for the requirements directly related to the requirements of the consent decree. Now, with respect to the proposed rate increase, it's going to generate an additional $7 million per year, so it'll fund about $70 million of those capital investments over the next decade. And commissioners, this chart is simply a graphical illustration of the significant increase in capital, and we've discussed this before many times, but in the 3 years, or in the years leading up to the CD, we were investing about $1 million per month in the wastewater system. Over the term of the CD, we will be investing actually in excess of $1 million per week on average. So significant increases in capital, and if you look at just the years to date, since the CD started back in 2005 through 2010, in total, wastewater has spent $340 million in capital. $283 million of that has been directly related to the consent decree. So bottom line, significant capital investment. And that significant capital investment, as we've talked about with the board as part of our long-term funding plan, would be funded with a combination of debt and rate increases. And using debt, and we've used a fair amount of debt, helps to spread the cost of that program over the long term, over both current and future ratepayers, which we think is appropriate given that these are long-term assets with long-term lives that we're discussing and that we're actually making investments in. Since the commencement of the CD, we've issued $290 million in wastewater revenue bonds. And we project that we will issue close to $400 million more by the end of the CD. So close to $700 million will be used to fund that almost $1 billion capital program in its entirety. We've also had rate increases, as you know, and we had a 50% in April of 2005, 50% in January of 2007, and an 8% in September of 2008. And those two have helped fund the capital requirements of the consent decree. And going forward, beginning in April of next year, we will continue to have some modest-sized rate increases over the remaining term, every 2 years approximately, we're looking at right now.